I would love to just understand there's so much that a CHRO focuses on, particularly in your role for IBM. I would love just to hear top of mind, what are the top two challenges that might be keeping you up at night?
Look, if I think about the top two challenges, in some ways we could have been doing this interview 5 years ago. In some ways we might be able to do it 5 years in the future. So just some of the details are maybe a little different, not the themes. The first thing is skills. Skills, skills, skills. In this new world of AI, what skills are important, what skills aren't? How do you upskill, reskill? How do you anticipate before employees are out of date in skills and do that in a futuristic way? And then the second thing is culture change. The world is moving fast. Transformation, I think, is being used, maybe overused in every company. And so really thinking through, how do you transform in good ways in a company, hold on to the things that are still important to you, but also how do you bring employees along on that transformation? So transformation and skills are kind of the two things keeping me up at night.
Yeah, that resonates. Not just at LinkedIn, but also in other conversations I have with all business leaders, not just human capital, not just in HR, just everyone sort of thinking about these two big, hairy issues that are really resonant at the same time.
Totally agree. And maybe that is the one thing that is a little different. I feel like when you thought about talent challenges a decade ago, there was always some flavor of industry specific talent challenges. I think what you and I are talking about is it doesn't matter what industry you're in, what line of business, or maybe even where in the world you operate. These are still two key areas for you.
Absolutely. And so when I think of the through line between both skills and culture change and transformation, the sort of what's in common right now and what's, kind of the glue that brings those two things together right now is AI transformation. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the role of HR in AI transformation.
So I'm pretty bullish on this, and so some of the people that are watching this may have different points of view, but I'll kind of put it out there, and I'd certainly be interested in how you feel about this. I continuously say that I think talent, HR, the CHRO, is uniquely positioned to lead the AI transformation in their organization, in the entire company, not just in their own function. And there are a couple reasons why I think about that. One, skills are at the center, and we are experts in skills. Two, this point around culture. Yes, AI is about the technology, but it is about a lot more than that. It is about willingness to change, how you lead people through that, the different roles of managers and leaders. I also think there's a unique perspective that we bring. I often joke that our lines of business leaders just want to go really fast. Our legal leaders want to go slow. Our finance teams, when it comes to AI, want to know how much it costs. We're kind of the neutral party sitting in the middle that can really tie out all of those pieces and ensure that every employee, regardless of the job role that they're in, can really go on the AI journey. So I don't know how you feel about that.
I agree. That is part of my responsibility as well at LinkedIn, just as you described it. And there's also something about, I think, in the, what makes us effective as an HR function is that we think about the different personas that we serve, right? There's the applicant, there's the new hire, there's the employee who wants to be promoted, there's the manager, there's the leader, their teams. And when we think about all of our programs, either performance management or when we're rolling out benefits, right? We're constantly thinking about how is this going to be accepted, adopted throughout the organization through these different personas. So we're constantly thinking about that. And this is another, with AI transformation, it's another moment to think about, what does this mean in terms of team dynamic, the experience of the applicant, the experience of a manager, where the employee experience function. And so it's sort of natural for us to be in this space and really think through how the change is going to take hold.
I think that's really well said. And it does remind me that I do see some of the mistakes that companies are making is they're kind of going halfway in on their AI skills transformation. And they're thinking about it at a macro level job role. And whether it's a seller, a developer, you know, whatever is that key job role in your organization. And it can lead companies to say, well, then the line of business owner should own that. You know, your head of engineering or your head of revenue or your chief product officer. But to your point, what they sometimes miss is that might give you the right skills and capabilities at a job role level. But now you need people to adopt those skills and capabilities. And the only way you get at that is through those personas that you talked about. You know, the new hire, the person that wants to get promoted, the person that already does a lot of learning, the person that doesn't do a lot of learning, the person close to retirement. And it's only there that you can make those job role descriptions, those new job role descriptions, a reality in the organization and figure out how you move forward. So I love this idea of kind of the job role and the persona, and that's where I think we're uniquely positioned.
Yeah, that's great. Going back to skills for a moment, it's a tough one. As you described, what makes skills so difficult, it's, you know, you could take an inventory of all of the skills that you have in your organization, and by the time you get to that last job family, you have to go back because skills are changing so rapidly. I would love to understand, how do you think about, you know, sort of skating to where the hockey puck is going in terms of skill? You know, sort of what insights are you looking at to try to figure out, you know, how do you upskill and sort of stay 2 steps ahead, if that's possible, so that your employees are really like on that cutting edge of like really understanding how skills are changing?
I'm not sure anybody has this completely figured out. I'll tell you what we're doing. The first piece is data. As much as you can use data, because sometimes the data will be an early indicator of new skills coming in and skills that start to fall away. And so again, I think within a job role, if there are 5, 6 skills that you think are key for that job role, continuing to checkpoint over time with data, is that skill really needed? How often is it being used? That's where you start to see these trends of, well, it was the number 5 skill before, now it's the number 2 skill. Or it was the number 3 skill, it's actually not being used anymore. And so that idea in real time of watching the skills, understanding how much they're being used, using data to inform it. I also think talent acquisition. That's the front line of understanding kind of skills in the marketplace. What do candidates have? Are there new trends that are emerging, new profiles that are emerging that may not exist in your company, which could be a little bit more static? And so taking that information in. I think data is a really rich source that we can always be using more of. The second thing I say around skills is that you actually, every company says they want to be a skills-based organization, but you have to make it real for people. And so how do you do that? You know, are you internally moving people based on their skills, or are you moving them based on performance? You know, really thinking through, is it a combination of both? Are you overweighting one versus the other? One of the things we did recently was, you know, we really thought differently about requirements we were going to have for each job role, and we built it into our performance management system. So employees at IBM get rated on 3 dimensions right now. Business results, makes sense, skills, and behaviors. And in that skill component, that's where we can ensure that employees understand, as you say, not just the skills that are needed today, but as they go forward. And then these behaviors around curiosity, being okay with failure are some of the things that we're also trying to instill, because I think that then underpins a culture where you think about, how do I skate to where the puck is? You have a whole organization that's doing it on their own just naturally.
I love that. I love that, you know, to think about the system, the entire system that's needed in order to light up a skills first organization, and it sounds like you're hitting it at various spots. And so it sounds like there was a culture change that happened at IBM, where you're moving from, perhaps looking at other factors of performance or what it means to do a job, to now being, rooted in sort of a skills ecosystem. I'd love to hear about what did it take to get your managers on board with this cultural change?
So I will tell you, and again, it's been a little journey for us. Like most companies, we were really grounded in performance. Results matter, and they still matter, right? And so then we went through about a 5-year period where we moved from, it was a and statement, results and skills. That was hard. That was really hard to say, wait a minute, Nickle, you and the HR team are telling me that I have the top performer, but because their skills are not up to date, maybe I can't give them as high of a salary increase as I would like, or maybe they're not eligible for promotion. So that change management process was really, really difficult in the beginning. What started to get managers over the line was that they started to see firsthand how quickly these jobs were changing. And so that somebody could go from being a top performer one year to an average performer or even a low performer the next year. In some ways, they had all the same skills and capabilities, so what was happening? And so again, surfacing that data to show what was happening with those individuals and those that upskilled, how their performance in the future was more indicative of what we would want. So again, we had to convince them with some data, with some training. So then we went on kind of a 2 to 3 year journey where it was performance and it was skills. And then we started to realize in this age of AI, even that wasn't enough. That the world is just moving so quickly that we actually had to start evaluating on this idea of behaviors, entrepreneurial spirit, curiosity, even more than just the standard kind of growth mindset. It was this idea of being able to move with speed, being okay with failure, even as you were trying out new skills. So it's these 3 components are the journey we've had to take managers on. And again, data has been very compelling to us on this. And ultimately results.
What I love about what you said, well, everything that you said, but what's really important that I think that you all did, it's sort of critical in change management, is the specificity. Right, saying growth mindset is one thing, but getting really specific on, we're talking about curiosity, just putting language there so that everybody understands, like, okay, that's what you mean. Or getting really clear on, yeah, you could be a top performer and have like amazing outcomes, but if your skills are not where they need to go, you could only see, you're only gonna appreciate so many of the rewards that come your way. Having that level of specificity during a time of change and turmoil and confusion is so incredibly important. When you hear the term change management, it makes you think that there is this, somebody brilliant came up with a change and you're going to accept it and just like drive it down through your organization. Yeah. What you're explaining, which I think is really brilliant and important for all of us to learn, is that it requires vulnerability. For the people that, the team that is driving that change, it's not just about driving it top down. It's having intellectual curiosity, being super vulnerable that, hey, this is what we think you might need, manager, but we're here, we're open, we're seeking to understand, help us. Yes. And having that vulnerability in that relationship actually is sort of the secret sauce for driving change.
Absolutely. And I think this is where we took some lessons from our development and product teams, which are probably no different than yours. Whether you call it agile ways of working, this idea of these constant feedback loops, or when you get negative feedback, it's not a bad thing. It means you have this feedback, you can pivot. So we kind of really learned a lot from their culture and ways of working. but translating it sometimes into kind of, whether you call them corporate functions. At IBM, we call them growth enablers. So our staff functions, legal, finance, HR, we call them growth enablers.
I love
Because
that.
you want to pivot the mindset,
Yeah.
right? But sometimes I remember saying, okay, well, HR has to, work agile. You have to take this feedback. You have to pivot. And I used to say, really? Like, you can't iterate on somebody's paycheck. Really? Is this how we're going to work? But the reality is, this is the crux of change management. And you bring a lot more people on the journey when you operate change management in this way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'd love to hear, what is an initiative that your organization has launched in the last 2 years that you're most excited about?
One of the initiatives is on this point of managers. So look, we've been doing management development training for a long time. We have it for new managers, experienced managers. There are just basics that people have to learn. But we decided that we wanted to do a different kind of manager training. And this is really for managing in this day and age, when the speed that you need to respond to things is increasing, when sometimes the teams that you lead know more on a subject than you know, how to give empowerment in a globally distributed team. And so we launched a new management development program around kind of highly effective leaders. And it really was, anybody could join. You could be a relatively new manager, an experienced manager, but somebody who wanted to upgrade their skills. In the spirit of what I just talked about on change management, we took 250 managers through it across 4 or 5 different countries, and they gave us feedback. What they didn't think was relevant, what we should have covered that we didn't. And so we're in the process now of taking that feedback, and we'll do some global launches of it coming soon. But it was really instructive for us, again, of we want our managers to really think about their people. And of course they have to do compensation. Of course they have to think about skills and performance. But how could we do that better, and what were we missing? And some of what we talked about is a little bit about what you mentioned, managing and leading with vulnerability, being okay with failure, how to get your team to rebound from failure. So there were topics that we hadn't even thought about that really came to the forefront. So I'm pretty excited about that program.
It's amazing. And do you see the role of manager changing?
I do see it changing. And I will tell you, on IBM, we've been on a journey about this. There was a period of time, and maybe I think many large companies had this. When I first joined IBM, almost 2 decades ago, managers were people leaders, and they were stewards of the company, and that's all they were. They didn't do individual contributor work, so this kind of player-coach concept didn't exist. They were people managers. There were a lot of benefits to that. That means you had dedicated people worried about talent. The downside to that, though, is they got farther removed from the work. And so as employees needed help on real tasks, real client situations, product situations, whatever the topic was, it wasn't always the manager that could help them with that. And so then you had concepts of like team leads coming in place. But that's a lot of structure. It's a lot of overhead that most companies don't really want. So we swung the pendulum, and I would say we're now more in a player-coach model. And this idea of managers are individual contributors, and they do some amount of work, but they're also these people leaders. I think the challenge of, and most companies are in this spot, of do managers rotate one way or the other too much? I think in some of our teams, our managers aren't spending enough time on the people talent component of it, and they're spending too much time on the job task component. I think it's getting exacerbated by AI, and given how fast jobs and roles are changing, it's causing them to spend more time there. And so we've got to bring it back in focus, where this talent piece of it also needs to be a critical part of their role. So that balance of what those two components are in the player-coach model is pretty important to me, and I'm not sure we're exactly there yet.
Yeah, that's very helpful. This leads me to my next question. As manager, as player coach, or manager as talent developer, it's also interesting to think about their role from an employee well-being perspective. And I know that's something that you and I both share, we're very passionate about. I'd love to get your thoughts around IBM's point of view around employee well-being just as an organization, your point of view, like what role do you see managers playing in ensuring that employees are thriving at work?
I think this is really important. And look, I think just like on many topics, people managers are the first line of defense on this. They're the ones interacting with their team members day to day, training them on how to identify signals or signs that something may not be right, knowing how to appropriately probe for the employees that need that, and knowing when to pull back if an employee doesn't want that, because this concept is very personal. And so how to take that very customized approach, I think, is also important. They also need to be honestly trained on all of our offerings in this topic, right? And so again, I think managers think about, I know about learning offerings, I know about our compensation offerings, but really getting deep on our well-being offerings so that they can recommend kind of customized to employees. We also have a digital agent like many companies, and my point of view on this has shifted a little bit. In the beginning, I was pretty adamant that I didn't want a digital agent surfacing well-being, mental health resources. I felt that was important for a manager to play that role, and I worried that if an employee was truly in a mental health crisis, I didn't want it to feel like they were going to an AI agent. Why I have shifted a little bit on this is that if you think about this topic, for many employees, stigma, how to talk about it at work, and access are two big barriers. So if AI allows more access, it allows privacy in kind of getting some initial recommendations, we're finding that the agent can also direct them to a human and get them to it faster. So this idea of managers are the front line, but how do you also put the right tools around them to, as you say, make sure that their employees are thriving?
That's wonderful. I love that. Last question. We've talked about a ton of change, the role of managers, there's the AI piece, there's the skills piece, there's just trying to get outcomes done, trying to focus on, hey, am I focused on the right things? Am I showing up with the right behaviors, the right skills, the right outcomes for IBM to be successful? All of this requires, I believe, employees to feel inspired, for teams to feel inspired and energized by what's ahead and not overwhelmed and emotionally hijacked by what it means to be successful during this time. And I'd love to hear from you, any thoughts, any ideas, and any tips for how we can inspire, motivate, and energize our workforces for all of these changes.
I think this is a great question. I know you and I are optimists in this area, right? Despite everything coming at us. And we had this conversation about this idea of, is AI a threat? Is AI just about cost savings? Is it just about productivity? Or is it about growth? I think you used the word with me, ambition. And I love that concept. And while many employees in the short term or departments or organizations may be in this productivity side of the equation, I think the first thing we can do is acknowledge that it's a reality, but also show them where the ambition then comes. When does it come? How quickly does it come? I think that's the first thing. The second idea I've been tossing around a lot is you talked about everything that we ask managers to do. Sometimes I think, who would want that job? It's a hard job. It is the critical job in all of our organizations. And, you know, I've thought about, is manager even the right term anymore? They are leaders, you know, they are these coaches that we talk about. So should we think about some other job role title? We had a past CEO who said, organizations aren't managed, they're led. And I think that is more true than ever. Again, this idea of how fast the disruption is happening at the job role, at the country level, at the product level, at the client level. They can't wait till something comes all the way up the management chain and then all the way down the chain. We need those individualized teams making real-time decisions. And so this idea of, do we need to redefine the role of the manager? Do we need to think about it differently within our organizations? Maybe how it's compensated, maybe the types of people we need in those jobs. So I would just urge organizations to think about what that means for them as well.
It's amazing. I am so inspired, personally inspired and energized by everything that you shared. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and I just can't wait to continue to learn all of the goodness that you're bringing to IBM and that you're bringing to the HR industry. So thank you.
Wonderful to be here as well, and LinkedIn's an amazing partner for us.
I appreciate that. Thank you.